It is now my pleasure to introduce our Geoeconomics panel, the Nexus of Trade, Investment, and National Security. Moderated by Korea Society President and CEO Tom Byrne, this discussion will feature former Republic of Korea Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee, former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor and Senior Fellow at Hudson Institute, Dr. Nadia Shadlow, and Director of the Economic Statecraft Initiative within the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center, Kimberly Donovan. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to this panel. And my first question, I'll just jump right in. Kimberly, you focus on economic statecraft, right? The intersection of finance, sanctions, and geopolitics. So from your perspective, how would you describe the current geoeconomic landscape in Asia? What is shaping it? Is it mainly the forces within, or are there forces outside of Asia that are shaping it, having a big influence on it? And what should we focus on?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me.
Sure.
And thanks for the question, Tom. So I would describe the current geoeconomics landscape as, defined by uncertainty, competition, and hedging. Many countries, particularly in Asia, find themselves caught between the US and China. And they're trying to manage these dual dependencies as best they can, and they're not trying to get caught in the crossfire. But at the same time, we're also seeing where there's a diversification among partners where they can, and whether that's advancing different relationships with other middle powers or through new regional frameworks. And so, when it comes to the trade truce right now between Washington and Beijing, it really has offered a bit of relief, but I would say that this is actually more of a pause than a real truce. The trade tensions have really exposed some critical vulnerabilities within the United States in areas like rare earths and semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, as well as agricultural commodities such as soybeans. And we've seen where Beijing has become increasingly willing to weaponize its economic leverage and flex its economic statecraft tools that we just really haven't seen them do it this way before. And so when it comes to identifying different choke points and using them strategically, I think we're going to continue to see where China is kind of going to push this a bit more. If you do consider the concessions that were made during the Xi and Trump summit, I think the U.S. got two main things out of the deal. China's agreed to resume the soybean imports, which is huge for our agricultural sector, and has also offered a one-year reprieve on critical mineral export restrictions. But in practice, I don't think either of these are necessarily a huge game changer. China's demand for soybeans really remains underwhelming despite the deal, and 1 year is just not enough time for the United States to build an independent critical mineral industry. And we've heard from others in different settings that that's a decades-long effort, and it's incredibly complex and expensive, and it really requires due coordination with other countries to begin to compete with China's dominance in this space. On the flip side, one of the big concessions that the U.S. made was suspending the Commerce's BIS affiliates rule. And so, for those that may not be familiar with this, about a month or so ago, BIS had issued a new export control regulation that was designed to crack down on shipments to companies that are majority owned by blacklisted firms. That rule wasn't about trade. The rule was a national security measure that was designed to prevent sanctioned firms from gaining access to sensitive U.S. technology through different loopholes in our export controls enforcement. And so by suspending it, Washington has essentially given Beijing, and by extension its partners like Moscow, which closely cooperate with them, kind of a pass on export controls while creating a level of regulatory uncertainty at home. And so, I'll wrap up because I think, I'm really excited to hear from the other panelists, but I think in the kind of short term, this easing of tension does provide a lot of economic breathing room. But the underlying competition between U.S. and China and how that impacts the region is fully intact. And going forward, I think the real test is going to be whether Washington can use this pause to articulate a coherent economic security strategy. Because if China's recent behavior is any indication, Beijing's no longer hesitant to openly use its coercive economic tools against the United States. And I think we really need to be getting out ahead of that with a consistent and long-term geoeconomic strategy where we are working more closely with our partners.
Okay. Let me turn to, before I get to Minister Yu, I think you'll give the
microphone, Tom.
Oh, thanks. I'll turn to Minister Yu in a second, but first he'll give the Korean perspective, I think. But Nadia, so your interests are the intersection of strategy, national security, technology, also strategic competition with China. But as a former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor under the first Trump administration, what's your opinion? What's your view of Trump's international trade policies on how will that affect the geoeconomic landscape?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of continuity from Trump 1 to Trump 2, and I know sometimes that's not a popular argument, but I think I can make that case. So the overarching theme of economic security being national security, it's an obvious phrase, but it happens to be true. And now we are all, as a country and in terms of allies and partners, working to think through how you do that. What are the mechanics of doing that? I think everyone accepts that proposition. But I think there's three elements, and I think they fit really nicely with Korea and with where the current negotiations over the past month have been: reciprocity, shared responsibility, and working with allies in a bilateral coalitions of the willing way. That's Trump's way. And we've seen actually what that can achieve. A lot of really good things over the past month. And I think the statement that everyone has been reading and talking about, I understand this morning, reveals the depth of that, of what you can achieve in a bilateral way, because he's often criticized for not working through multilateral institutions. So with reciprocity, I recognize there's uncertainty in the geoeconomic domain, but that's partly because I think there's still a resistance to accepting reciprocity as a geoeconomic principle, resistance to accepting what's going on as a fundamental trade adjustment as opposed to the common discussion of a trade war, right? If you look at what's happening as a trade war, you have a different set of assumptions and a different way of interpreting what's happening than as a fundamental trade adjustment. I see it as the latter, actually. So I think we've seen the consistency there. Shared responsibility, we've seen, I think, especially, again, the past month with Korea promises to increase defense spending by 3.5%, really looking at troop deployments, being flexible, the nuclear submarine deal, all of that, fosters a rich defense relationship. There's an economic component to it, right, with investments, U.S. shipbuilding, the nuclear deal. There's a commercial element to that, which is part of the economic security frame. And finally, as I said, Korea being an example of how I think there is a continued commitment to working with allies to deal with the competitive environment. And I just came across a quote from President Lee about this. I think he had said, I wrote it down if I can find it, competition requires excellent partners, he said recently. And I think we've seen that over the past month. So I think we're in a good position, and I think the past month of looking at Korea as kind of the perfect example of these three important strains in the way the Trump administration is thinking is really positive.
Okay, good. Well, that brings us to Minister Yu. So during the first Trump administration, you served as Director General for Free Trade Agreement negotiations at MOTI from 2015 to 2019, and you led the Chorus U.S. FTA amendment negotiations. So based on this experience, how do you assess the recent trade agreement between the leaders of Korea and the U.S.? Will this help strengthen the geopolitical advantages or positions of Korea and the U.S. versus China mainly?
Good question. Well, as someone who has been closely involved with Korea-U.S. bilateral economic issues, including the KOROS FTA, it seems to me that the Korean government had to navigate really difficult situations under challenging circumstances. Nadia, you mentioned the continuity between the two the first and second Trump administrations. But even under the first Trump administration, when I led Korea-U.S. FTA amendment negotiations, our discussions took place within the institutionalized FTA framework. U.S. made at that time a lot of strong requests, but we tried to reflect both sides' interest within the structure of the FTA agreement. But this time, the discussions, the negotiation took place outside the FTA framework. And in fact, I feel that Korea was disadvantaged because as an FTA partner already applying zero tariff to US products, Korea had no additional tariff concessions left over. Well, anyway, this seems to be the reality that we face and deal with today. And Korean government, worked really hard to find a solutions and also to incorporate important elements both on trade and investment and security into the joint fact sheet this time. So there are two parts, like the trade and investment and security part, and especially security part, they had a great achievements, but I will leave it up to the security session after this. And regarding the trade and investment part, there is a sense of relief in Seoul that at least some uncertainties have been reduced or eased, and Korea avoided being at a disadvantage compared to other major countries. But I believe this presents a new set of challenges. First, regarding the tariff. Korea continues to apply zero tariff to U.S. products, but now faces the situation where the U.S. is imposing 15% or more, which is really unprecedented, the level not seen in my whole lifetime. And second, Korea made a huge investment commitments, investment pledge, 200 billion in strategic industries and 150 billion in shipbuilding corporation. This is really untested path. Much will depend on the implementation. So as the previous session mentioned, it ain't over until it's over, or the forever negotiations. So in this new era of forever negotiations, maybe negotiation may be never ending. So rather than this joint fact sheet, rather than being a final outcome, this could be the start of a beginning of long and uncertain process, and much will depend on how both governments manage or select the specific projects that can actually deliver benefits to both sides. So for this deal to be durable and sustainable, it should not only support U.S. manufacturing development, but also support growth and innovation in both countries and strategic sectors. So I would now say that the real test lies ahead of us, and this is really untested path. And I hope that both governments can work together, not only between our governments, but through close public-private partnerships. They can work together to find a way that this can deliver really mutually beneficial outcomes to both countries.
Can I just make one comment? Because I think you point out something really important in that, in some sense, there's an it's unprecedented in the types of these commercial ties, investments in U.S. shipbuilding, but that could create sort of new types of linkages and relationships and new models of those relationships going forward as we struggle as a whole in sort of figuring out what this post-war architecture needs to look like. So I think there are positive elements, too, of reinforcing the U.S.-Korea relationship and also reinforcing the relationship with the U.S. and other allies in new ways. So I think there could be opportunities.
Yeah, much will depend on how we implement
it's done.
this.
Exactly.
Right. Well, maybe I'll, for the those were the opening round. I'm used to having Peter wire my ear on the stage. Peter, not here. So that leads me to, I agree with you that potentially, prospectively, this could be beneficial for the security interests of the U.S. and Korea. But there are obstacles and hurdles that have to be overcome, and these are long-term prospects. Nadia, you write about the strategic competition with China. We're dangerously dependent on our primary geopolitical competitor for critical inputs. Do we have time and do we have the willing cooperation of our key allies to reduce this dangerous dependency on China?
I think there's a broad recognition of the vulnerabilities created by these dependencies. But, as you just pointed out, and as I think the panelists will agree, it is all in the how. It is time. Time is a key factor here. Mm-hmm. And we've seen how difficult it has been to change these dependencies. First, there was the strategic recognition that they were a problem. And I think Trump 1 was very important in articulating that clearly. There had been a lot of concern in the previous Obama administration, but the concerns were not expressed in the same way, and it's really important to express things clearly, and so identifying China as a strategic competitor at that time did play an important role in shifting the public debates. In the years since, Trump 1 and then Biden and now Trump 2, we've all been grappling with the how. And it's been difficult. I think finally now we have some models, but the key is speed and agility, and we have yet to sort of prove that. We're trying. I'm more familiar. My background is more on the defense side, which I know is the next panel with Dave. But on the defense side, you really see the Department of War now focusing and making speed and agility, speed especially, a key barometer. So we need to do that, I think, on the economic side as well. And I think both of our bureaucracies are, there's some red tape in both of them. I am positive in terms of Trump's seriousness about the regulatory reforms that are needed to unleash the private sector. So I think we can work together as countries to use speed as a key, parameter, especially in the shipbuilding deal.
Minister, you expressed concern over this huge investment pledge that South Korea has made to the U.S. at $350 billion, right? 150 in shipbuilding. You also expressed concern that this is a huge amount of money for South Korea, a huge amount of resources. You expressed concern of the hollowing out of Korean manufacturing base by this. Can you put the proper, how do we dimension that? Is this a long-term threat, or how do you see this developing?
Yes, there are concerns, in Korea whether, putting this huge amount of resources into investment in the U.S., whether that can also cause the hollowing out our own domestic manufacturing industries. So that's why I emphasize the importance of the specific implementation of our investment commitments. If they can create Korean companies to expand their presence in the U.S. market, they can cause actually Korean manufacturing base to be strengthened rather than to be weakened through this kind of investment peak. So what's important is to turn these challenges into opportunities so that this can actually help growth and create growth and innovation in both countries, especially in those strategic sectors that were mentioned in the joint fact sheet.
Right. Mm-hmm. And what about public opinion in South Korea? Is it supportive of this, the leaders' agreement?
Well, as I said before, sigh of relief that the worst scenario has been avoided. And also uncertainty has been eased. But we also realized the reality that whether this can turn into a vehicle that can drive growth and innovation, and that can also be a mutually beneficial partnership, it will depend on the details of the implementation.
Right. Okay. Right. Maybe we can talk about, on the reducing critical dependence on China for critical minerals and also materials. The U.S. has adopted industrial policy as well. And so the CHIPS and Science Act, of course, came from the Biden administration. The CHIPS and Science Act, maybe even parts of the IRA on the EV batteries and the sourcing requirements from particular countries. Is this, what time frame are we looking at for the U.S. to significantly reduce its dependence on our geopolitical competitor, China?
Maybe.
Well, anybody could take that.
Yeah, anybody can take. Yeah.
Sure. So it's admittedly not my area of expertise, but at least when we're looking at it from an economic kind of perspective and the economic statecraft issues, I mean, it is, I think, important, as Nadia has mentioned too, that like we're taking the steps to reduce these dependencies. We're probably a little late in doing that, but at least we're moving in the right direction. But at least my understanding from different like working groups that exist and things, I mean, a lot of these efforts do take decades, and they do take investments, and it does require more flexibility in our regulatory framework. So I think as long as we're willing to kind of make those changes and those strategic investments, then hopefully we can start to move towards reducing our dependency on China. But then I think what's also important is that we still need to be considering where our partners also continue to have dependencies from China, right? And kind of where our different decisions may be impacting them as well. I think it's going to be a kind of a longer term issue that we're going to be dealing with for a while, but at least we're taking steps right now to alleviate it.
Go ahead, Nadia.
I would add that I think there are two issues we need to look at, and I think that our community of people that write on these issues need to think about transparency. And what I mean by that is a sense of how much is enough. We haven't quite articulated at what point will we have decided our dependencies are reduced. When will we have done enough? Do we need to produce 90% of the magnets, 80% of the magnets? And I think the same issue of how much is enough, is relevant to the sector. And second, we need to now focus on, measuring the actual outcomes over time. So there's a lot that's great about the CHIPS Act. It's actually hard to find out specifically the degree to which it actually increased, American production of semiconductors by what percentage. Maybe I'm not looking at the right metrics, but I've looked, the specific, factories have been built, there's ground been broken, but really where did the money go and what are the outcomes? There are many studies, I'm not sure in the Korean system, but in the American system, many studies identifying the vulnerabilities in these sectors. If you go back to the 1980s, and you can see those studies of the vulnerabilities, including shipbuilding. There's an interesting one that the Department of Commerce did, BIS, I think in 1980, I think it was 2000. Anyway, it was at least 25 years ago on vulnerabilities in shipbuilding. Now we need the same studies in documenting the actual sets of improvements that all of these changes are likely to bring.
Like a cost-benefit analysis on these policies.
Because
right?
Progress really does matter if we want to reduce the dependencies and prevail in this long-term competition. We need to actually start to assess the progress.
Right, okay. Well, since we started to talk about shipbuilding, shipbuilding sits at the intersection of commerce and security, all areas where U.S.-Korea cooperation holds enormous potential. So are the U.S. and Korean intentions to make America's shipbuilding great again realistic, considering the political and regulatory constraints in the United States? Minister, we talked about this a little earlier this morning.
Yes, let me start with this. Shipbuilding really offers opportunity for the U.S. To meet its naval and maritime needs while also reviving its industry, but also at the same time for Korea to secure stable demands and enhance global competitiveness. But the reality is that, as you mentioned, that the U.S. faces really structural constraints, long weakened supply chains, labor shortages, and also legal regulatory barriers. So let me especially highlight just now, among many of the constraints, let me highlight just now 2 areas that need really practical solutions. First, the legal constraints, the Jones Act and Byrne's Tollef's Amendment. They limit or restrict the overseas construction of U.S. ships. So to make this MASCA project really initiative a success, both sides need to find a practical solutions to resolve these legal constraints. And second one is labor shortages. When I often visit factories in Korea, I sometimes walk through facilities where machines do almost all the work, and you see just now only a few or sometimes almost no people on the floor. But whenever I visit shipyards, I am also amazed to see tens of thousands of workers performing on a wide range of tasks. But even in Korea, where the manufacturing base is very strong, almost nearly 20% of our workforce come from overseas. That shows that how severe the labor shortage has become even in Korea, and the problem will be far more serious here in the U.S., where manufacturing base and skilled labor has the base has been largely weakened or eroded. So, in that sense, both sides should work together to find the ways, especially to address these labor shortages, and including some visa pathways, where the Korean experts and technicians, they can work together alongside U.S. Facilities and also with the U.S. workers. So through the Korea-U.S. Shipbuilding Cooperation Working Group, we should address these regulatory barriers as well as labor shortages to make this project deliver real results and benefits to both sides.
Right. So the Jones Act refers to commercial shipping. In particular, ships in the U.S., when they go from port to port within the U.S., they have to be American-built, owned, and crewed. The crews have to be American, at least a certain percentage. And the Byrne-Tollefson Amendment applies to, it prohibits overseas construction of military ships. But the fact sheet actually addresses that this is something that the U.S. wants to explore, let me put it that way, with South Korea. Now, I understand there could be a presidential waiver that could allow maybe President Trump to do this during his term, but a better solution would be to amend these laws in Congress, right? Does anyone have any comment? What are the prospects of that happening?
I'm not sure. I know that in Trump 1, I think I can say that I personally saw debates about the Jones Act, and there was a division in the administration about that. And I think that there still are divisions, probably similar ones. And so I'm not sure in terms of where Congress is on this issue.
Okay. Kimberly, you focus on the intersection of finance, sanctions, and geopolitics. With the Trump tariffs in place, isn't there some diversion of bilateral trade from country X to the U.S. to country X, country Y? Are the trade agreements that exist in Asia, like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the TP, the Trans-Pacific, the Comprehensive, and this acronym troubles me always. The Comprehensive and Progressive Trade Agreement. Is there new life being breathed into these by Trump's actions as countries, trade supports economic growth, and they don't want to sacrifice economic growth in this environment. Is there renewed action in this area?
Sure. I think, Nadia, I think, addressed it really well in her opening remarks on this concept of an adjustment.
Right.
Right. So, we do know that President Trump prefers bilateral trade deals over multilateral fora. And I think it's really interesting, even with the APEC summit that happened just a couple weeks ago, it seemed, at least in U.S. media, less about the actual summit and more about the side meetings and the deals that the president was trying to make with different regional partners. So I think in this space where we're seeing where there's just different adjustments on how things are moving forward, I think the reciprocal tariffs that were first announced earlier in the spring were maybe kind of this kicking off point, right, to try to reinvigorate some discussions on where do we need to land in terms of different trade deals and agreements. But I think that there's still a lot of kind of figuring out what direction things are going. It was very positive to see the fact sheet come out just last night on from the White House on the U.S. and South Korea agreement. So at least we kind of have a better sense of the direction things are going in. But as Minister Yu said, I mean, the tariffs are still very much on Korea while there's no reciprocal tariffs back on the United States. So I think we're just going to be kind of feeling our way through this for a little bit. I think from my perspective and the work that my team and I do, are really super focused on kind of China, just as this huge regional player, because as we saw kind of the tariffs escalates and these different adjustments on trade between the U.S. and China, which are still playing out, products from China were kind of reducing, coming to the U.S., but then they were dumping it in the Indo-Pacific region. And then there's, the re-export issue. So I think those are also just growing pains we're going to have to work our way through going forward. But, just the fact that we have high tariffs on China, or we're trying to figure out what our trade deals with China looks like, they're still producing, and they still have an overcapacity problem, and they're going to continue to dump their products on some of our other regional partners that we may need to work with our partners on.
Right. So it doesn't, globally, China is still a dominant player and still has too much supply, right? Nadia, so you talk about this trade adjustment. Are you referring to something that's unsustainable in the U.S.? The rise of China, the geoeconomic rise of China since the WTO, and how they took advantage of access to different markets, in particular the U.S., to build up their economy. And you're saying that this has to be reduced. And of course, the U.S. trade deficit is still very large, and I don't think the tariffs have had any significant effect on reducing the U.S. trade deficit. So are these the adjustments that you see as beneficial and something that kind of justify these tariffs?
I'm going to punt to Minister Yu in a minute. But I think overall, the larger adjustment, what I mean fundamentally, it's an adjustment away from the tenets of globalization as being absolute. It's an adjustment away from purely economic efficiencies driving markets. Mm-hmm. So we're now adjusting to input other things of value, whether it's on the manufacturing side of the kind of nation that America wants to be, right? The arguments that Robert Lighthizer makes, that Orrin Cass makes, these are philosophical arguments too. So these are adjustments about valuing other elements of inputs into economic systems. That's an adjustment. The adjustment of thinking that the problem of vulnerability and dependencies is something we need to consider. That's the economic security, national security part. I don't know. I mean, I think it depends on the figures you look at in terms of whether the tariffs, I mean, the numbers I read suggest that we're making a lot of money from tariffs, right? The president has said that. Now, he's going to be, with the Supreme Court case now, it's sort of interesting because that could come back to hurt his position in the case as a tax. But I think Minister Yu can speak more to the impact of tariffs in terms of reducing our trade deficit. Not sure right now we're seeing that.
Right.
Maybe
how's Korea's bilateral trade surplus with the U.S. faring?
Yes, Korea has trade surplus with the U.S. So in terms of the adjustment that she mentioned, it's too early to tell the effects of tariff and all the recent policies. But what I can tell is that, yes, we understand the U.S. is undergoing this huge adjustment or transition from more like the consumption-driven economy or service economy to production economy, centered on manufacturing sector, and also having a strategic decoupling with China. But in those adjustment or transformation process, what I would like to highlight is that Korea is really a good, valuable, trustworthy partner that can work together with the U.S. reviving its manufacturing sector and especially in strategic advanced industries. So rather than having a tariff frictions or trade frictions with good allies and good manufacturing partners like Korea, from now on, we should channel our efforts rather than on trade frictions, but on enhancing both of our industrial and technological competitiveness in this ever fastly changing trading environment.
Right. Well, one of the sections in the fact sheet is enhancing commercial ties between Korea and the U.S. Aside from shipbuilding, do you see any other over the near term promising sector?
Yes, I think a lot, but especially from my perspective, semiconductors, AI, and also digital infrastructure, energy, they stand out as the most promising fields of cooperation in the coming years and decades. Especially, the U.S. has leadership in, for example, in case of AI, U.S. has the leadership in model development, platform, and broader tech ecosystem, and Korea has strength in AI chips like HBM and also advanced packaging and stable power supply infrastructure. So when we combine our strengths, we can create really powerful synergies that can drive our growth and innovation for the coming years and decades.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So, Kimberly, you do have an expertise in finance and sanctions. Does this new trade, the new global trade regime or paradigm, whatever you want to call it, will this in any way affect the dollar dominance? I mean, by far, most trade is most trade transactions, even between countries that aren't trading with the U.S., but say China with Korea, are denominated in dollars. Is the dollar dominance and the preferred, the exorbitant privilege of the dollar being the preferred reserve currency, is this being undermined? Do you see this over the near to medium term not really affecting the dollar dominance?
So my team at the Atlantic Council, we do a lot of work looking at dollar dominance, and one of the projects that we have is called the Dollar Dominance Monitor. So we've been tracking the strength of the dollar in light of all the various different policies, decisions, as well as just financial aspects and indicators like swap lines. So what we're continuing to see right now is that the dollar remains secure in the near to medium term, and 58% of international trade still runs on the dollar, and there's a significant percentage of international foreign reserves that are held in dollars. So I think for now, we're okay. I'm not seeing right now where tariffs are necessarily affecting the dollar, but there are several other fiscal and economic policies that could be. And I know there's a lot of different debate within the administration, outside the administration on related to stable coins and if that's good for the dollar or if it's bad for the dollar. But then there's also kind of just, especially in academia, the growing sentiment that the increased use of economic tools like sanctions or tariffs and export controls are going to affect the strength of the dollar going forward. And that's where we are seeing where, not to keep bringing it back to China, but countries like China, as well as Russia and Iran and others, are looking for ways to de-dollarize and to use it as a way to mitigate against their risk of exposure to sanctions. And so, where I think right now, again, the dollar is okay. We are very much paying attention to where local currencies are being used for trade. So that's, renminbi and rupees and ruples, and kind of where that trade starts to happen outside, especially of kind of the U.S. and Western financial systems that we actually have, like we can see and we can monitor. We can't see what's going on, in renminbi when it's you going through Chinese banks and things like that. So. I haven't seen where tariffs are necessarily affecting the dollar right now, but I think as we continue to look at using economic tools to address national security challenges, we need to be considering the impact that it has.
Right. Well, tariffs and the trade diversion, if you're not trading with the U.S., you necessarily need to have your exports denominated in dollars. But yeah, I haven't seen anything yet either. I mean, some years ago when the euro first came on the scene, there was talk that the euro would rival the dollar in terms of a preferred reserve currency. But after the euro crisis, that kind of put the kibosh on the euro as a preferred reserve currency. We just have a couple more minutes. Would anyone like to make a concluding statement before, or observation or comment before I turn to the audience for questions? If not, is there anyone? Okay, I see one question here.
Hi, I'm Marissa McPherson. I'm with the National Committee on North Korea, and predictably my question is going to be focused a bit on North Korea, considering this is about the intersection or the nexus of the trade as well as national security. I'm curious what economic considerations are top of mind on both sides of the alliance in their respective formations of policy towards North Korea. Is there overlap perhaps in those priorities? And are there opportunities there to strengthen the alliance through those priorities? Thank you.
So I'm not an expert in North Korea, so maybe we can leave it up to the next session. You can answer that.
I'll answer it, but from my perspective of just looking more at like how sanctions have been used, and where I think the United States has actually worked very closely with Korea as well as other allies on sanctions, especially towards Russia, and just to bring in kind of the Russia aspect to this too, and the ongoing war in Ukraine. I mean, we are seeing where Russia's, they have their own labor shortages. They're in a war economy. They have North Koreans, fighting their battles for them and working in their, factories to make weapons. And we're also seeing where there's increased kind of connectivity on the financial side between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and as well as Venezuela, because they are kind of using very similar systems and tactics to evade and mitigate the impact of Western sanctions. And so one of the things that eventually kind of meets its way to the security piece of this is where we are seeing this growing financial connectivity amongst these different actors. And that's something at least that we're paying close attention to. We call this line of work the axis of evasion, because we really are seeing, especially where China and Russia are continuing to work together along with Iran, and now kind of they're pulling little brother North Korea into the mix. And that's where I think it's just, we've had such a fantastic cooperation with South Korea for decades around this issue, and it's continuing to, we're making a lot of progress together on that front.
Take one more question from the audience, the gentleman over here, and then I'll go. We have one E question, then I'll read you.
Hi, my name is Ta-Hom Chen, visiting fellow from CSIS. So I know when people talk about Korean industry investing in U.S. shipyard, people focus mostly on the submarine deals, but do you foresee that in the future as Hanwha Ocean investing in the Philly shipyard and Hyundai Heavy Industry partner up with General Dynamics, will those Korean shipbuilding company start become competing in the U.S. Navy contract, or they focus more on the commercial shipbuilding side by themselves or partner with other U.S. companies? Thank you.
Anyone have any insights into the Philly
I'm
shipyard
not sure. I'm going to
operations?
punt to David Maxwell on the next panel. In terms of, I think that's more of a question, I don't know, Hanwha's, what their strategies are for reaching into the U.S. shipbuilding market. My sense is, we're going to resist. I mean, American shipbuilding companies are going to want to retain, their share of that market. So it will all be about the balance. But I'll let Dave answer that next time.
I'll just say, I'll add something I learned from a trip with with members of Congress at Korea Society as a congressional study group. We went to Hanwha Ocean's R&D Center near Incheon. And so we got briefed. They were very excited about the Philly shipyard deal that had just been announced. Philly shipyard is not the most dynamic shipyard, to say the least. Neither it's the most advanced technologically. Now, it once was, because of World War II, I think all the victory ships were made there. But they hope to ramp up production from like 1 or 2 ships a year to something more than this over a 10-year horizon. So there's a long, slow curve to go up before I think they become a threat to American shipbuilders. Let me try this, see if I can get this working. Do we have it, or did I knock it down? Is it up?
It's not on the screen yet.
Yeah. Why don't I just read it? How can the U.S., Korea, and like-minded allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific work together to bolster supply chain resiliency, especially when it comes to dual-use technologies? Is there a role for the alliance in backing non-red supply chains?
Non-what supply chain?
It's RED. I don't know what that means.
I mean, I think we're already, in a general way, I think we've addressed
Yeah,
a lot of
okay.
these topics. We're working in all these areas, critical minerals, semiconductors. I mean, I think the deal and the statement that was just published articulates that.
Right. But I recall as under the Biden administration, there was a critical minerals initiative that involved Korea and other countries to financing that would allow. Korea was going into an African country to mine cobalt or something and to ease the dependency of China. Does anyone have an update on that initiative to reduce?
I don't have a particular updates on that initiative, but it started since several years ago, and it has been continuing because Korean companies recently, like POSCO and some other companies, they invested in critical minerals in various parts of the world, and working together with countries in the region. So I think it takes really years to achieve supply chain resilience, perhaps more than a decade, but the process has already started and has been continuing these days.
Okay, well, thank you. We've run out of time. Thanks for your contributions and your insights, and thank you for asking the questions.